Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 41, Final Destination. The days seemed to blur together as we marched south. It took another 3 days of walking to clear the massive forest of the kin. Beyond that were a wasteland of burned-out homes, buildings, and cars. Despite our travel time and distance, we had only just made it to Milwaukee. The city had experienced something apocalyptic, even more so than the system appearing. As very little was left standing, short of a few sections of the highway. We moved quickly around the outskirts of the urban area, keeping an eye out for any possible hostiles. There were the occasional people that fled at the first sight of our caravan. At first, riders were sent out to capture any survivors. When they never returned, the group moved even quicker to clear the area. We were heading between two burned-out buildings along a rural road when we were ambushed. Screaming men and women poured from the structures, heedless of their own safety. At least I thought they were men and women at first. As they got closer, I noticed their vacant black eyes and mouths full of razor-sharp teeth. As soon as they were close enough, I used Identify. Daywalker level 6. The rest appeared to be the same creature of levels between 3 and 9. There even appeared to be children in the mix. All were emaciated, wearing ripped and threadbare clothing. Filthy undead. I heard Charla roar as she struck out with a fireball. The spell streaked towards one of the groups of daywalkers, exploding amongst them. It was super effective. The spell set a dozen aflame and scattered the rest from the shockwave. Paul, get out there and deal with the rest on that side, the rest of you fight the others. I don't know what the woman expected. There were over 20 undead remaining in the group she ordered me to attack. I just pulled out my staff and got to work, not like I had a choice. Using Imbue, I tried to cast healing, light, or holy damage. Apparently, those didn't count as elements I could imbue. Oh well, they seemed to be weak versus fire, I activated that instead. The ends of my staff burned with fire as I cast the spell. Blink stepping into the center of the group, I cast Eye of the Storm. I always wanted to see a fire tornado, just not from the inside. The spell acted a bit differently than usual as the flames from my staff enhanced it. The air outside seemed to be sucked upward as the fire spread vertically, sucking everything within the 10-meter area of the spell inside the flaming vortex of death. The heat was intense, causing me to take a few points of damage every second I held the spell. I kept the pyre going for a full 10 seconds, burning through 250 mana, but it was worth it. With my bonus damage to undead and evil creatures with my titles, I did nearly 380 damage to all 20 before the spell cut out. This was enough to kill most of the undead. The rest died as they fell out of the sky, still on fire. The area was deathly quiet for a few seconds before I heard laughing and clapping. Turning, I saw that it was coming from Charla. I knew you were something special, she said, just magnificent. The chaos you produce is phenomenal, truly a spectacle to behold, she continued, her clapping ringing through the silence. The rest of the caravan looked at me with either horror or quiet calculation, probably asking themselves if they could win against me. Dominique eyed the newest acquisition of Charla's. He was smart enough to fear her meteoric rise in power, but that didn't mean he needed to like it. He had been assigned to her by the council, to keep her in line. Now that she had her new puppet, he wasn't sure how well he could accomplish that task anymore. He knew from watching the battle at the bazaar that the man was a capable fighter, and the female he had cut down had been decent as well. Truly a pity that a slave could not be recolored after they escaped. She was such a lovely little thing and would have made a good concubine. Now he had to find a way to deal with this Paul. Nobody had any real clue what his class was capable of. Asking him was out of the question, as he would likely tell Charla about the query. Seeing just this small demonstration proved it was capable of a large amount of destruction. He would keep an eye on the man. Dominique would report his findings to his bosses and let them decide what should be done about the man. As far as he was concerned, the woman people started calling the Black Queen should be put in a collar as well. Despite Charla's status and her father's ability with the collars, they weren't among the top ranks of the Black Dragon sect, despite what anyone at the lower levels thought. Those spots were reserved for the bosses that bankrolled the sect's creation. Charla's father was a glorified scientist that resided at the upper level. To all those not in the loop, he was the de facto leader of the sect. Very few people within the organization knew the true hierarchy. Why lead from the top when you could lead from the shadows? Let the fools think what they wanted, for now. When the time was right, the true leaders would take their place. Until then, he had to keep the spoiled brat in check. The caravan had finally left the Milwaukee Metro Wasteland, as it had come to be called, by more than one soul within the group. Some had also called it the Soulless Lands because of all the undead that inhabited the husk of a once major city. No answer had become clear as to why the city was leveled. I heard speculation that some grand necromantic spell had been used. It didn't matter, the city was a wasteland, overrun by the undead. The fighting had not been all that difficult, but it had become tedious towards the end, with undead of all sorts popping up to attack the warm living flesh within their group. Luckily no crypt lords or stronger undead showed up. Perhaps they were deeper inside the city. Once the caravan leaders realized the undead were easy pickings, we slowed to a crawl. People wanted to level, so they sent the slaves out to clear the surrounding area of the undead. I was held back for the most part because Charla wanted to keep me near her now. She was parading me about like a shiny new toy. At least she wasn't beating me, I thought. The rest of the trip was rather uneventful. Scouting groups would be sent ahead of the column to either kill or capture whatever caught their interest. They added at least 100 new slaves in the following 3 days of travel. Only once did Charla send me out to deal with a particularly reticent person. "Look man, I'm just doing what I'm told, I have no choice in the matter," I said, ducking a bolt of molten rock. "You and your cronies can fuck off, I would rather die than be a slave," the man replied savagely. I sighed, it would be so much easier if I could just kill this man and move on, but they wanted the mage alive. Magmamancer was an advanced class and magic users, in general, were not as common as I thought they would be. "Look dude, this is going to go down one of two ways. Either you come willingly or I beat you into submission." I dodged another volley of molten arrows, guess I got my answer. I was chosen for this task because I could heal the man if I injured him too severely. I could wear the man down, eventually, he would run out of either stamina or mana. Looking at the strongly built, tall black man, my guess was on his mana running out first. "Fine, let's just get this over with," I said, whipping out a stunning gust. He reacted, throwing up a barrier made from hot stone in front of him. I used his barrier to my advantage. Casting Earth Fist on his barrier, causing it to spear out towards him. He dove to the side to avoid my attack. I finally had a reason to use my new spell, Banshee's Wail. I opened my mouth, letting out a piercing scream that made the very air shudder and warp. The man was caught off guard by the spell and was blown backward as the wave front slammed into him. There he lay with a glassy look in his eyes. I quickly walked over and kneeled next to the stunned man. "Sorry dude, nothing personal," I said, clamping the slave collar around his neck. I took the opportunity to use Identify. Charla had finally let me have access to all my status as a reward for good behavior. She still held off on my skill points, but maybe if I behaved, I could earn that as well. The first thing I did was turn back on the name function. Even if I didn't know the names of the people I killed, the faces still haunted my dreams. So there was no point having it turned off. Jamal Redford, Magmamancer level 10. He was surprisingly well leveled for a loner. I looked around at the area the man had been found in. Rocky ledges jutted from the ground, surrounding a 2-story house. Only a small entry tunnel broke the continuous wall, a destroyed gate lying nearby. The first group to discover the odd landscape had blown open the entry, only to be set upon by Jamal here. I could still see the smoking corpses, lying under a layer of hardening rock. I wouldn't be shedding a tear for that group, they had all been Black Dragon initiates. I guess that's what they were called. I was still learning all of the minutiae of how the sect operated. I healed the man's injuries and waited for him to awaken. It only seemed fair, instead of having him wake up to a sect member barking orders at him. "Wah! What the hell?" Jamal said, bolting upright. Of course, he tried to cast his devastating magic on me but failed, the collar preventing him from acting without orders. A member came by a few minutes later to retrieve us. After we arrived back in camp, that was the last I spoke to Jamal. The man glaring at me the entire way. I understood his anger, but there wasn't anything I could do about it. After capturing Jamal, we made quick time on the rest of the journey. I could see the familiar Chicago skyline in the distance, perhaps less than 5 miles away. It was nearing sunset, so the scouts found a place for us to set up camp. It was quite eerie seeing a large city devoid of light. I looked closer, realizing that wasn't entirely true. I could see a couple of areas of brightness, that I would associate with light pollution. I guessed that at least one of those was our destination. Our camp was set up in an abandoned shopping center. Groups of guards were positioned at every entrance and even a few on the roof. I guess being this close to Chicago, they didn't want to take any chances of their enemies discovering us. I guess by default they were my enemies as well now. Morning came fast, especially when I was allowed to sleep through the night. What little sleep I got with the constant nightmares now plaguing my rest. Charla was busy meeting with other Black Dragon members, dealing with caravan business since we were so close to our destination. I was left to my own devices. Not that I could do much, she had ordered me not to leave the store. I didn't think we would be here much longer. Scouts had been sent out early in the morning to rendezvous with the main enclave. We were only waiting for the scouts to return, to know if the rest of the route was clear of enemy forces. Since I was being left alone, I might as well improve my rune crafting. It was a lot harder to find a quiet spot to work with this many people jammed into the shopping center. The woman's bathroom turned out to be the perfect hiding spot. Sure, there were women in the caravan, but without running water nobody used the actual bathrooms. I slipped inside the room. The door needed to remain ajar a bit, to let some light from the main area in. It was enough to barely see by. I wanted to test something I had been thinking about since I met the kin. The strange rune I thought wouldn't do me much good kept percolating through my thoughts. If it worked, I might just have a way out of slavery. I couldn't exactly test it on my collar though. For one, it was not the same item as the older style collars. My orders also prevented me from damaging the collar. Since I didn't know if my runes would damage it, I couldn't exactly use it as a test piece. I also couldn't use the old method I employed by melting the collar down. The rune also wouldn't let me shrink out of the collar, their magic letting them fit snugly to any size neck. I pulled out one of the old-style collars. I had a few, given to me by Charla in case I needed to capture more people for her. I also pulled out a scrap bit of metal to perfect the design on first. Chapter 42, Black Dragon Stronghold. My crafting time was shortly interrupted. I could hear frantic activity from outside the door. I hastily packed away my gear and went to see what the commotion was about. It looked like everyone was packing up and preparing to head out. I could see a new group of individuals by the main entrance talking with Charla. I decided to make my way over to listen in. Mistress Cotton, so good of you to return. We had thought you lost to the wilds, a man wearing formal business attire said, in a haughty tone. Just looking at Charla, I could see her ire building. I made sure to stay out of her line of sight. Surprisingly, she kept her feelings contained. Yes, well, we had some delays. Nothing that I couldn't handle though. The man's gaze roamed over the remains of Charla's troops. A significant amount had been lost to fighting in the north. The man let out a disdainful snort. Yes, I can see you only brought back the dregs. Perhaps next time you will have more luck in your endeavors. Charla was clenching her hands so tight I could see blood beginning to seep from where her fingernails dug in. I weeded the chaff from my command, only bringing the strongest fighters and slaves back, she responded tartly. How odd, I recall the missive saying to return with anyone past level 10, yet I can tell just by looking there are quite a few here, under that level. Perhaps you need to be removed from command if you can't follow simple orders. Charla's hand started glowing with power after the man's insult. The man just looked at it and smiled. With a snap of his fingers, I felt a wave wash over me. Charla's hand no longer glowed. I checked my buffs, they were all gone. The man had dispelled all magic within an area. No wonder he didn't fear Charla. Calm your temper, Mistress Cotton, you wouldn't want to make an egregious error on your first day back, now would you? Your father is waiting. I suggest you gather the remains of your people and get them to the compound as quickly as possible. There are enemy patrols about, but even your low-level slaves should be sufficient to handle the forces. The man turned and left, taking his retinue of 10 along with him. I was about to do the same when I felt a hot gaze land on me. Paul, come here. I gulped but complied, making sure my face was a mask of stone. I walked over to the seething woman. Would you have stepped in to protect me, if Darius attacked? Don't lie to me. Shit, I had no choice but to tell her the truth. No, mistress. What if I ordered you to kill him? If you ordered it, I would give my life in the attempt, mistress. It would be a failed attempt, I knew that. Even if I thought I could take the man, which I didn't. The collar would prevent me from harming him. She backhanded me across the face with all her strength, her gauntlet ringing as it hit me. She was a small woman, but she knew how to hit. I collapsed to the floor, my jaw dislocated from her strike. She was stronger than she looked. I suspected she had an item that enhanced her strength. Fix yourself, and pack up my stuff. I rose to comply before she struck me again. We were on the road 10 minutes later. All the slaves either in front, back, or to the sides of the column. I guess they meant to protect the important people inside a ring of fodder. It was all rather pointless as no enemies appeared. We arrived at a large barricade between two buildings. They had managed to pour a concrete wall 20 feet high, spanning the entire width of the road. 2 watchtowers sat on either corner, able to watch the gate as easily as down the cross street. At least 10 people patrolled those towers. Another 2 stood in a third post above the gate. Thick iron bars ran vertically with a few inches in between them. A large iron crossbar sat across the inside. As we approached, I saw this crossbar retract to one side with a whirring sound. I recognized that sound from the mana engines the army was using. Now that I looked closer, I could see spotlights on the guard posts. We passed through the gates. The guards eyeing us just as much as they eyed the streets. We walked another 2 blocks before we came to a parking structure, turned barracks. The slaves were all ushered inside to be redistributed among the rank and file, or placed where they were needed. I went to follow but was stopped when Charla grabbed me. "Oh, no. You need to come with me. I need to meet with my father, and we need to get your collar situated." "Yes, mistress," I replied, following along behind her. I couldn't catch a break today, and it seemed like Charla was on edge. This didn't bode well for my situation for tonight. We made our way past the parking structure, having to go another block up. All of the buildings in this area were at least 5 stories tall, if not more. The one we headed towards looked to be about 12 stories tall. It was hard to tell with the glass facade. One thing did stand out about this particular building. It was fully lit up. I could see lights coming from inside the lower windows on the shaded side of the building. Charla made her way directly to the main entrance. 4 guards stood outside. They watched us but otherwise didn't interfere with our entrance. It was strange watching Charla head straight for the elevators. It made sense though, the entire lobby had electricity. The doors on the elevator opened quietly and I followed her in. I was going to stand behind her but she stopped me. "From now on when you are with me you are to act as my guard. That means you will protect me from any direct threats by being a shield. If I am in an important meeting you will remain quietly behind me but within striking distance of anyone that might wish me harm." She seemed to hesitate on the next bit. "While you are protecting me I release you from your bond not to harm anyone wearing the black dragon armband. The only 2 people you are to never harm during that time is me and my father. Am I clear?" "Yes, mistress." This choice of hers didn't change much for me, it just made me the sacrificial pawn in any intersect dispute involving her. Perhaps I could do something to widen this crack in the sect. The elevator arrived at the top floor, opening to a large waiting area. A gorgeous slave woman sat behind a desk, greeting us as we arrived. "Welcome back Mistress Cotton, Master Cotton has been waiting, please go in." Charla barely even acknowledged the woman as she strode towards 2 large black doors at the far end of the room. I followed in her wake, barely able to keep pace. She pushed the doors open, striding inside. I followed behind, closing the doors. Then I took up station near the doors, remaining as still and silent as possible. "Father." A stern, taller man looked up from his paperwork to take in his daughter. I didn't miss his glance and frown at my attendance. He got up, a large smile on his face, and Charla literally jumped into his arms. They hugged for a few seconds before the imposing man put her back down. "You're late," he said in admonishment. Charla started to pout. "I had a few things to wrap up before I could return. I knew things here would be fine." "That's not the point, my plans have a timetable we must stick to for them to succeed." The man put a finger to his lips before he headed over to his desk to press some sort of button. I couldn't see the item clearly, but what I did see was some strange geometric patterns engraved across its surface. When the item activated it felt like my head was filled with cotton. This must be an enchanted item. I remember Horace the merchant talking about them. I don't recall seeing any designs on the blades or other enchanted items we found, but the designs could have been cleverly hidden behind the grips or inside the clothing. Thinking back to Fiona made my chest tighten. I had to work hard to push those feelings back down again. There would be time to mourn when I was free of these people. "We can talk freely now. This item will prevent anyone from eavesdropping on us. I wanted you to return as quickly as possible because..." The man stopped and looked at me. "Slave, you will not utter or write a word that is spoken in this room today. If you do so you will immediately end your life." "Understood." "Yes, Master Cotton." The man stared at me for a few seconds. It felt like he was glancing at my soul to get a measure of me. After he was satisfied he went back to conversing with his daughter. The council is fed up with the slow progress we are making. I fear they might move to eliminate us soon if we can't make progress. That's absurd, it's their own damn fault that we are in the mess that we are in. If they had installed the activation of the node we would own this entire area by now. Charla was getting heated, her hands clenched again. Calm yourself, child. We both knew this day would come eventually. They have been nothing but a hindrance since we began. Unfortunately, we can't kill them. We don't have enough support within the sect to get away with it, yet. If we can take down the Sons of Autumn, or the Triad, perhaps we will gain the favor we need. I didn't know who these other two groups were, but I could guess based on context. Charla hissed, like those fools could deal with them any better. Those religious nutjobs seem to multiply endlessly from what you told me. And who is the Triad? They are the remnants of three groups, the Forsaken, Children of Dawn, and the remnants of the local army. Bikers, drug dealers, and corrupt soldiers. Why are they such an issue? They outnumber us 4 to 1. They just can't match us in battle, not with our slaves leading the charge, he says, specifically looking towards me. Yeah, well fuck you too buddy, I thought right back at him. Their numbers mean little when they flee from any engagement. They are not fleeing, child, they are wearing us down, bit by bit. What about the last group? We haven't managed to locate their base of operations yet. They keep doing hit and run attacks on all three groups. Eventually, one will find them and eliminate them from the board. Why don't we just do it? We could, but that wouldn't gain us the leverage we need. Nobody really sees them as a credible threat. I believe our best bet is to eliminate the Sons of Autumn. They are suicidal enough to engage our army in open combat. Fine, when do we engage them? Soon, I need to get a measure of the reinforcements you brought with you. Charla gave me a shark-toothed smile. Well, that couldn't be good. Before we do that, who did you bring with you? Father, this is the man that broke my arm. I was able to capture him with one of those new styles of collars I told you about. Come here boy, the man said in a commanding tone that brooked no argument. I walked swiftly towards the man, stopping a few feet away. He slowly walked around me, his eyes going over my armor and my rings. I felt like a prized pig being inspected for slaughter. Your class? Mantra Enchanter. Yes, I can clearly see that, stop playing dumb. What does your class do? Buffs, heals, and some AoE damage. Your weapon? I pulled my war staff out from my ring. He took it from my hand to inspect the item. All the while Charla sat back and watched. He handed me back the weapon. What is your strongest attack ability? Flurry of blows. Demonstrate it for me. I took a few steps back and activated the ability. I have no clue how it happened, 1 second he was standing off to the side, the next he was in the path of my attack, slapping away each strike of my staff. Then he hit me with his palm. I flew across the room, slamming into the wall. I crumpled to the floor, groaning in pain. I felt like I had been hit by a wrecking ball. Well, he survived, it's more than I can say for your last pet project. I rolled over and tried to stand, failing miserably. I took a glance at the damage notice. 510 damage taken. That left me with only 35 hit points. And this was with all of my buffs active. Good God, how high-leveled was he? I sure as hell wasn't going to risk scanning him to find out. As my senses returned I could hear Charla giggling. I healed my injuries before I attempted to stand again. Feeling my ribs pop back into place as the healing magic worked. I stifled any signs of pain as I rose. The man watched me. I see you broke him, he said, turning to Charla, who stopped her giggling to look chastised at her father's tone. Take him down for his test. What about activating his collar? I did it before our little fight, now go. Yes, father. Chapter 43, Test. I followed Charla to the back of the parking structure where the slaves were housed. There was a cordoned-off area surrounded by bleachers of all things. The stands were packed with people cheering on or booing the contestants. Others were watching from the upper levels of the parking structure. Occasionally I would see a light blue flash as a dome lit up. It appeared to surround the arena area, preventing any errant attacks from getting through. I want you to accept 10 duels, you are not allowed to heal during the fights. If you lose I am going to be very upset, are we clear? Yes, mistress. I stepped into the ring, my first challenger approaching from the far side. Carlos Santiago would like to challenge you to a duel, this is a non-lethal duel and combat will end when one combatant reaches 10% health. All health and mana is restored after the match ends. Before I accepted the request I checked his stats. Carlos Santiago, knife fighter level 9. The man was sporting two wicked-looking short blades, I believe they were called kukri. The man twirled the knives expertly in his hands as he stalked around me. I accepted the match and the fight was on. I ran towards the man, my staff ready to intercept his blades. This would be a good chance to see how my skills measured up. I expected everyone in this arena was a hardened survivor. Carlos was quick, slicing at me with his knives as he tried to get behind me. I slapped his knives away while trying to stab him. He deftly maneuvered his body away from my strikes, while continuously harassing me with attacks. I finally saw an opening, whipping my staff at his torso. The blow connected, to a clone made of smoke. I tried jumping back but felt a searing pain below my ribs. I managed to get the man back in view as I placed my hand over my wound. It came back covered in blood. The man smiled cruelly, flicking the blood from his blade. I guess I had my answer to how my skills measured up. Not very well. I couldn't afford to lose these fights. I returned the man's smile with a glare of my own. I spun my staff flicking it horizontally in front of me while casting stunning gust. The man ducked below my strike but that left him open for the earth fist I smashed into his stomach. The man grunted as the spike of earth lifted him from the ground. I ran forward to try and capitalize on his impairment, only to have the man roll off the stone pillar, slashing me in the leg with his blade as he fell away. I winced in pain as I hobbled backward. The man had a large gut wound from my attack but he wasn't out yet. He was down a blade though as he had to hold in his intestines. The man was barely able to stand with his wound bleeding out, but still, he persisted. I decided just to keep out of range until he bled out. The man cursing me as a coward as I backed away every time he got close. It took another 30 seconds for the match to end as he bled out down to the duel's threshold. The man spit at me as he stalked off the stage. Most people were booing me as I walked off. One match down, 9 to go. I reeled back as the man slammed his elbow into my face. This was my 5th match and I was getting tired, making more and more mistakes. I ducked the spiked mace aimed for my head, running to the side to get some range on the man. The man calmly turned towards me, swinging his mace back and forth. I wiped the blood from my mouth, keeping an eye on the fighter. The man stomped down on the ground causing a wave of rocks to shoot towards me from the ground. I had to dash to the side to avoid his attack. He rushed towards me, his mace glowing bright white. I was forced to cast Area of Denial as Blink Step was on cooldown. The man had forced me to use Blink Step twice already in this fight. The mace crashed down on my barrier causing a flash of light to blind me. I blindly threw my staff out towards his direction. It crackled with electrical energy from imbue. I felt the staff impact on something soft. The man let out a scream as his muscles locked up. I rubbed at my eyes trying to get my vision to return before the guy recovered. I realized something was wrong as my sight returned. Dust was floating around me. I glanced at my buffs, whatever attack the man had used dispelled Area of Denial. I ran forward to finish off the fight. I stumbled into my 8th fight. 2 hours of fighting were dragging on my body's ability to stay standing. Most of my spells were on cooldown or I had been forced to multicast them. This limited my options in this fight. These weren't the pathetic excuses of Black Dragon fighters I had fought before. No, these were highly skilled combatants, forged to this point by surviving countless battles or having previous experience in bloodshed. I quickly scanned the woman. Sheila Hunter Valkyrie level 12. She was an imposing woman, standing at over 6 feet, with a long braid of golden blonde hair halfway down her back. She was wielding an axe in one hand and a round shield in the other. Both glowed slightly in the waning light. She didn't smile or try to taunt me as others had. No, she had the clinical look of a killer as she watched me. Her eyes seemed to catch every movement. I readied myself as best as I could. "You sure you want to do this in your state?" I shrugged, not like I had much of a choice. "I see," she stated as she walked out of the ring. What the hell was going on? I watched her walk over to a few other people. One nodded her head and entered the ring. I decided to check the information on this one. Moana Longview Chemist level 6. Wait, were they sandbagging so I would win? She was also a non-combat class, why fight in the arena? Moana pulled out a rapier, giving it a flick. She gave me a half smile and sent the duel request. I was more than happy to accept it. Moana looked to be of Polynesian descent, sporting a short afro on her 5-foot frame. I saw the woman give an exhale as she put her sword up in a fencer's stance. Then she exploded across the arena at me. I looked down at the sword sticking through my chest with disbelief. They played me, my rage overflowed. The woman must have expected the attack to end the fight, but she had missed my heart by the tiniest of margins as my armor deflected and absorbed a significant portion of the attack. I screamed in her face, activating Banshee's wail. The woman took it full in the face. Her ears bled as she was flung back with tremendous force. Nobody was meant to be that close when the spell was unleashed. I stomped towards her as blood poured from my wound. I didn't care, I only saw red. My staff was covered with rock and then fire as I double imbued it. Molten rock dripped from the blade, searing the ground and me as I neared my adversary. Distantly I could hear people shouting, but nothing would stop me from my goal. I reached the woman and was about to stab down, ending the wretch when my collar started to cause me excruciating pain. I tried to ignore it, but the pain forced its way through my red haze of anger, managing to stay my hand. The woman recovered, her eyes going wide as she crawled back and away from my weapon. All I could hear was the clapping and laughing coming from Charla. She had stopped me, but why? Then I realized why. Even if the match ended, the molten stone would remain on my target, eventually, killing them. Oh God, I tried to force the anger back in the box, but it refused to comply, it needed a target. That's when I spotted the Valkyrie step back into the ring. The chemist having surrendered. I exploded towards her as soon as the duel began. She held her shield up and I saw her blur forward 2 steps. A wall of air slammed into me, sending me tumbling off to the side, but my rage would not let me back down. I slammed my staff into the ground, activating seismic strike. The entire arena rippled with my attack, causing the woman to fall to a knee. I rushed forward, activating stunning gust. Instead of a burst of air, my staff shot a bolt of molten rock at the woman. I had to give her credit, she was quick on her feet, rolling away from my attack. I utilized Banshee's wail again, my mana was dropping fast as I pulled out all my tricks. Sheila's shield glowed bright red as my attack battered against it. After the attack ended, she stood unharmed. She whipped her axe at me, forcing me to sidestep. Something felt off about this. She still had her hand outstretched. Then it hit me, literally, her damn axe hit me in the back. I was sent sprawling to the ground. Bits of molten rock landing on me as it splashed up from my impact. I didn't care. The red haze was back. The impact had been just enough to knock my weapon from my grip, cancelling my spells. I picked up the now magic-free staff. I had just enough mana for blink, step and flurry. I blurred towards the focus of my hate and pummeled the woman into submission. She did her best to keep my strikes at bay, but she couldn't match my blink step enhanced agility. I only knew the match was over when 4 men dragged me out of the arena. Eventually, I was able to bottle my anger again. It was late, so my last match would have to wait for tomorrow. I remember Charla thanking a few people for their generous donations to her credits. Apparently, she had bet heavily on my matches. Now I knew why she didn't want me to lose. The next day I was sore, but all my spells were reset, so I was in a good position. I walked up to the arena, staff in hand, and buffs active. One last match and I was done with this nonsense. I scanned my opponent. Obadiah Kuthmonk / Juggernaut level 10. This couldn't be good. This man with his dual class was essentially level 30, and he was a slave. The crowd was going wild, cheering for him as well. He didn't look like much. He was maybe 5'10", with sandy-colored hair sporting a few streaks of grey. He entered the ring with both hands casually behind his back. He also wore only a monk's robe of red with yellow accents. But you could feel the strength radiating from him. I didn't know if dual classes got double stat boosts at 5 and 10. If so, he easily would outclass me in stats alone. The match prompt came up and I readied myself. I hit accept and found myself flying across the arena to slam into a wall. I felt my ribs and back give from the impact. I only saw 2 things before I blacked out, the monk standing where I had been and a message. You have lost the duel. Little did I know that this was Master Cotton's personal slave as well as the arena's current champion, undefeated champion, I might add. This didn't stop Charla from punishing me for failure to follow her instructions. Chapter 44, 3 months later. My team, well, not really my team but the team I was part of, hid in the rubble of a collapsed building. We were getting ready to assault one of the Sons of Autumn outposts. This would hardly be my first encounter with the church as most of us called them. I had plenty of old scars to tell of the fierce fights. Over the months we had steadily pushed the church back. The acolytes of the church would throw themselves into battle with a singular determination. This made them a dangerous foe to fight but also a predictable enemy. Our goal today was to draw out the garrison force and eliminate them. While I wasn't the strongest or most capable fighter in the slave ranks, I had made a name for myself. When I let my rage out I could dominate my section of the battlefield. My other plans had to be put on hold. Mostly because I never found the free time to work on my crafting. The fighting seemed to be non-stop. When I wasn't fighting I was training in the arena or protecting Sharla. This had improved my flexibility in combat by quite a bit but meant my plans took a hiatus. Hopefully, once we finished this campaign I would be able to rest a while. The only other benefit I saw was finally hitting level 13. Sharla siphoned off so much of my experience that it had taken me 2 months just to level once. I took a glance at my stats. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter level 13. Strength, 12, plus 2, modifier x14. Endurance, 16 modifier x32. Agility, 15, plus 2, modifier x14. Perception, 15 modifier x14. Intelligence, 19 modifier x32. Wisdom, 14 modifier x14. Charisma, 11 modifier x14. Luck, 14 modifier x14. HP, 512, 563. Mana, 608. Mana Rigan, M196. Nothing earth-shattering there, although, Sharla had finally allowed me to pick my skills again. The first thing I did was use up the free slot I had from level 12. That unused slot had bothered me for some time. I used it to finally pick up Elemental Defense. Elemental Defense boosts elemental resistance by 20% for 30 minutes for all allies within 20m, cost 75 mana, cooldown 15 minutes. The spell worked on me as well as all allies within its range. It had proven to be well worth taking as it reduced the damage I took from my spells. I'll be honest, my level 13 skills were not the greatest. Protection increases armor by 2. Increase the chance of blocking, parrying, and evading strikes by 10% for 3 min for all ally within 20m, cost 50 mana, cooldown 10 minutes. The spell was okay. It was definitely more effective when I was in a group like I am now, so I took it. The next spell was just weird. Regenerating Rain, healing waters instantly heal the target for 30 HP and 10 HP every 2 SEC for 30 seconds, cost 65 mana, cooldown 1 minute. At first, I wasn't sure about the spell. It cost more than my other healing spells while barely healing more than Rejuvenate, and significantly less than Healing Touch. Plus it poured rain on people from a small cloud that formed over their heads. I liked to use it on people I didn't like much. That was until I started to play around with the spell. Turns out it synergized with my elemental imbuement to some extent. Having water active doubled the healing of the spell. If I added lightning the spell could block a few spells or arrows. Wind slightly boosted the speed of the person under the spell's effect. Fire and earth didn't seem to synergize with the spell as far as I could tell. Regenerating Rain also seemed to wash scars away. It's one of the reasons I never used the spell on myself. Sharla liked my scars, and when they started to fade she would add new ones. I didn't need to give her any more reasons to do that. I was shaken from my contemplation as a hand tapped my shoulder. I turned to see Sheila Hunter the Valkyrie pointing towards the outpost. Sheila had petitioned her owner to get me on their squad. She was impressed with my performance in the arena. The Valkyrie had managed to hit level 14 a few days ago. She loved being on the front line, and my ability to heal and buff meant she could remain there longer. I looked at the outpost. 5 acolytes were coming out. We knew they would eventually. They made a weekly trip to the local bazaar to secure provisions. "You're up, Paul, don't fuck this up," Gregorio Masterson said. I glanced at my squad leader as he and the others made their way down the flight of stairs. Gregorio Masterson, strategist level 16. Good old Greg was your typical slave master. Treated us like shit, using us as he saw fit. I added the man to my kill list. We were on the ruined 3rd floor, mostly for the trick I was about to pull off. I waited until the group of 5 neared the building. My staff was already imbued with earth and lightning. It was an interesting combination that added a mild stunning effect to my attacks. I took a running leap off the building, utilizing blink step and godly might. On the way down I activated Area of Denial and Seismic Strike. I already knew that Seismic Strike had an increase in damage if I put more force into the impact point. I wondered how much more it would do with this combination. The acolytes of the Sons of Autumn looked up as they heard my chanting. Some were preparing spells, others were readying weapons. None were fleeing, they just didn't do that. I could also hear shouts coming from the outpost as their alarm bells started to ring. This all happened as I was falling towards the group. They managed to get a few spells off that bounced off my shield before I struck the ground. It was like that scene from the popular movie, where the main character sinks into the concrete after falling from the building. The ground under me sunk, or the area around me rose, I couldn't tell from my position. All I knew is a massive wave of rock radiated out from my impact point. The 5 men were catapulted into the air from the force of my spell. A few seconds later I heard 5 wet slaps as their bodies landed again. 2 had died from the impact against the ground. The other 3 were down. I was completely unharmed, Area of Denial had absorbed the fall completely. I didn't waste any time, running over to the downed acolytes and ending them before their reinforcements arrived. 25 angry men and women boiled from the outpost to assault me. That little trick left me with 58 mana. I wasn't too concerned. I pulled out a mana potion, chugging it while the enemy threw spells and projectiles my way. I had been given the item for this mission since I still wasn't allowed to shop in the bazaar by myself. This brought my mana back up to 250 as my mana regen kicked in as well. A bolt of blue light struck the front ranks of acolytes, causing some to fall over dead. This would be Li Wen's ice bolt attack. I could feel the cold from her attack even this far away. I glanced over at her. Annabelle Li Wen, Glacial Shaman level 11. I hadn't realized she hit level 11. Good for her. The attack had been enough to disrupt the charge from the acolytes. Sheila took full advantage of this by doing a focused shield charge at the front ranks. Her axe going to town as she chopped down repeatedly. My rage was contained most days, so I didn't need to get in on more of the action, but I did anyway. I rushed towards the right flank of the attackers. Tony and Ben could handle the left side. I released Banshee's wail as I got within range. 3 of the 5 I targeted fell to their knees clutching their ears. The other 2 were protected by some sort of spells. I still had 5 seconds left on my shield, so I went in. My target and my shield connected, letting off magical discharges. Unfortunately for him, my shield was superior and he was forced back as I pummeled his shield with my staff. Each blow sent tremors and lightning racing across his shield. The other man, that still stood, tried his best to help his associate, but I broke through the shield in 3 hits. I quickly activated Flurry, stabbing the man once in the chest before I whipped around and unleashed the last of Flurry into his friend. It took me a while to realize I could use Flurry with both ends of my staff without having to reorient my weapon much. Both men went down as lightning coursed through their bodies. I finished off all 5 of my targets and got back to the battle. It was pretty much over, so I took the opportunity to cast heals. I started with Tony and Ben since those 2 seemed to always take the brunt of the damage. Tony Giovanni Pugilist level 9. Ben Harper Soul Blade level 8. Ben was always the one hurt the worst, mostly because his skills actively drained his health. Tony was always just in there, smashing people with his fists. They thanked me for the healing as the fighting came to an end. We had successfully cleared the outpost. Of course, that slimy piece of shit Masterson would take all the glory. Speak of the devil, here he came now, finally crawling out from his hidey hole. So it gave me great pleasure when I saw the white arrow sticking out of his forehead. He fell to the ground dead. Stepping out from the building behind him was a person wreathed in shadows. The 2 groups just stared at each other for a few seconds before the shadows dissipated, taking the person with them. Not it, I called, looking at Masterson's corpse. Fuck, that's not fair, Paul, Tony said. I just shrugged as the others called out the same. Tony was the sacrificial lamb that had to explain this to the headquarters. This is bullshit, he complained, tossing the body over his shoulder. So, should we torch the building? I asked the group. Might as well, Sheila replied. I pulled out a few Molotovs, lighting them before tossing them through the windows and doors of the church's outpost. It didn't take long for the building to start spewing black smoke from openings. Waste of good alcohol if you ask me, Ben muttered. Of course, he would, the man was a raging alcoholic. Only the collar kept him off the booze. We headed back towards the compound after we looted the corpses. The acolytes never had much, and this time was no different. I wondered what shitty leader they would shove down our throat this time around. They always made the same mistake, sending only one Black Dragon member per team. If that person died, the group's standing orders were to collect the body and return to base. This had been my fourth team leader in the past month. This unknown group was getting bolder in their strikes. Mostly because they knew they could get away with it. Maybe with Gregorio's death, we could get a break for a few days. Chapter 45, Dissenting Opinions. Lady Luck spits in my face again. I was dragged into a room after a severe beating by the watch captain. They roughly threw me to the ground in front of a group of seated people. This is the suspect. I couldn't see who spoke as I was held on the ground. Not sure why they bothered, they could just order me not to move. Slave, do you know why you were brought before the council? No, masters. You are suspected of leaking information to the Shadow faction, causing the deaths of 4 of our members. I suspected something like this might occur. It didn't escape my notice that I was the only slave in all 4 of the groups that recently got attacked by the Shadow faction. The pattern wasn't clear at first, but after the 3rd death, it was clear something was off. The fact that I was hauled in front of the council right after was suspect. My guess was someone wanted me gone, or someone wanted Charla gone since I was her guard. Your punishment for this crime will be death. Captain, please carry out the sentence. Just like that, no counter-argument, no witness, not even Charla here to defend me. Not that I was overly surprised, I was a slave after all. With pleasure, honored councilman. That voice sounded familiar. I managed to turn my head enough to see Dominique the duelist heading towards me. His blades ready to end me, like he did Fiona those months ago. Before he could carry out his task, my tormentor appeared. What is the meaning of this? Charla screeched angrily as she stormed into the room. Dominique halted his approach, looking towards the council in uncertainty. Your slave has been found guilty of deliberate treason against the section. That's bullshit and you know it. Did anyone bother asking him if he performed the deed, or was it conveniently forgotten that slaves can't lie if you order them to tell the truth? We did not forget, the evidence is indisputable. What evidence? Your slave was the only slave in all 4 groups that were attacked. No other slave would have been able to provide the information on the group's whereabouts. Charla rolled her eyes. The only thing that proves is someone sold out those groups. It could have just as easily been a sect member. Ridiculous, our members are all loyal to the section. Charla didn't bother to refute the man, instead, she directed her next words to me. Paul, tell the truth. Did you collude or meet with anyone outside of the sect since you arrived? No, mistress. Have you attempted to subvert the organization in any way, shape or form? I was glad my plans had been put on hold. No, mistress. She turned back to the council. There you go, now perhaps instead of harassing my slave you can redirect your focus to actually finding out who was responsible for those deaths. Come on, Paul. I stood without anyone stopping me. The council wasn't made up of fools, a direct confrontation with Charla would lead to many people being dead. They had played their first hand, now it was time to see what came next. I followed Charla to her father's office. Once inside I took my usual place at the door. Her father activated his artifact as soon as the door shut. So what brings you here today, Charla? Her father inquired. The council has made their first move, they tried to eliminate my guard while I was busy. Was all her father said. Charla shook in anger. Is that all you have to say? Her father just raised an eyebrow. What would you have me say? We knew this was coming. They have become even more belligerent with us in the last months as we continued our successes in the field. Just then a knock came at the door. My staff was in my hand before I even realized it. So far I hadn't had to expose my ability to harm other sect members while defending Charla. Not that I cared about harming them, but the thought of having to protect her made me physically ill. Mr. Cotton, Obadiah is here per your request, the muffled voice of the receptionist said from the other side. Paul, open the door and let the man in. I did as Master Cotton asked, keeping my staff out until I verified the identity of the new arrival. Obadiah strode into the room without a glance in my direction. I shut the door behind him, storing my staff back into my ring. The man gave a slight bow to his master. I arrived as soon as I could. It's time, Obadiah, gather your team and clean the slate. Make sure to include Dominique in your cleanup. I was about to shout that Dominique was mine to kill, but 3 months of conditioning to obey orders kept my mouth shut. It will be carried out immediately, Master, he said, bowing and immediately leaving to carry out his orders. I watched Charla's father head to a panel in the wall. He popped it open and the wall safe behind it. He took something out from the safe, handing it to Charla. Head to your quarters and take your slave with you. This will prevent anyone from bypassing your door with skills. I suspect you may get a few visitors, try to play nice. Thanks, father, Charla said, getting up on her tiptoes to give her father a peck on the cheek before she bounced towards me. Come on Paul, we have a play date, don't want to keep our company waiting. I followed Charla out, I suspected this was going to be a long day. We arrived at Charla's apartment, it was not in the same building as her father's. As we walked down the street I could tell something was going on. Furtive looks in our direction and people hurriedly heading off as they spotted us. It made me nervous. Charla seemed oblivious to the danger, either that or she just didn't care. My bet was on the not caring part. I bolted the door shut as we entered her apartment. It didn't take long until we got our first visitor. A loud bang echoed across the apartment as someone tried to kick the door in. Charla just looked up from her book with a sigh, as she lounged on the couch. A few more blows impacted the door as it started to crack. So noisy, Charla commented, Paul, be a dear and get rid of them. Yes, mistress, I replied, pulling my staff from my inventory. Being up on the 5th floor would limit my spell options but I could deal with the shortfall. The door broke as I entered the entry hall. 2 Black Dragon members entered. I recognized them from the security forces but I scanned them anyway. Gus Mendez Bouncer level 10. Hank Storwick Shaman level 12. Behind those two came an 8-foot-tall humanoid made from sticks and leaves. Out of the way slave, we are here for your master. I stepped to the side to let them pass. As they went to push past me, I struck. My staff imbued with flurry struck the unsuspecting bouncer in the side. His armor managed to blunt my blows to some extent but it wasn't enough to save him from my attack. The fools had no idea Charla had modified my obedience rules and it cost one their life even before the fight began. I pushed the dead bouncer back into the other man and cast Banshee's Wail. The man managed to have or get a magic shield up in time to defend against my attack. His nature elemental was unaffected by my spell. It flung extendable branches in my direction, trying to crush me in its grip. I imbued my staff with fire and hacked the branches off as they tried to grip me. The beast let out a hollow-sounding scream as my fire set its vines ablaze. The shaman cast a spell that flung a barrage of needles in my direction. I was forced to take the spell as my area of denial skill was still on cooldown from the fight earlier. The spell hit me for 130 damage and poisoned me for 5 minutes with root rot. Root rot will cause your extremities to turn black and rot, reducing your agility 1 point every 10 seconds. I staggered back from the spell impact. I felt the anger shake its cage, demanding to be let free. I pushed it back down. I hadn't dealt with this specific type of spell but I have dealt with a few corruption spells in the last few months. The best way to deal with them was to just heal through the effects. Against my better judgment, I cast Regenerating Rain. It would be enough to keep the agility debuff off of me and wouldn't waste my other heals. What surprised me was that the 5-minute timer on root rot was going down at an accelerated rate. I guess fire did synergize with my spell, it was burning away the rot at a rate of 30 seconds per second of my spell. It's no wonder I never noticed the synergy earlier. I ignored my new revelation, getting my head back into the fight. I saw the shaman starting to cast another spell as his elemental lumbered towards me. The fire had gone out on its branches, leaving only charred bits and some smoke. I cast Blink Step as it lashed out at me, dodging around the strike and narrowly avoiding the thorny bush that sprouted up where I had been standing a second ago. I rushed towards the shaman as he hastily threw up a wall of interlocking branches. I shoved my staff forward, releasing a stunning gust as a spear of fire. The attack burned straight through the wall, slamming into the man's chest. Even with my imbued element, the attacks didn't do all that much damage. Except I got lucky and the stun activated as the man's clothing went up in a blaze. I guess wearing a bunch of dead sticks and vines was a bad idea for the man. The elemental screamed as it was banished back into its own realm. The magic used to sustain it no longer available as the shaman burned to death. Charla came in and cast an ice wave spell to put out the fire, making sure I got hit just a bit. I cleaned up the mess by tossing the dead bodies into the hallway. Let that be a deterrent to any other would-be assassins. I stood guard inside the entry vestibule for the rest of the night. It was preferable to tossing and turning as the nightmares returned to plague my sleep again. I could hear fighting going on outside the building. A few times I even heard people enter the floor, only to turn around and leave. By morning all was quiet. Charla showered and dressed, then we headed out to meet with her father. She ordered a few slaves we passed to clean up the mess by her apartment and replace the door. Where she thought they would find a door I didn't know. Dead bodies of slaves and Black Dragon members littered the streets. The slaves had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Either that or ordered to become human shields for their handlers. A few crews were picking up and disposing of the dead. We received a few nods from the sect members we passed. It appears that Master Cotton succeeded in his plan to eliminate the council. Judging by the amount of dead, I would say a tenth of the sect had lost their lives in the night's fighting. It weakened them, but not by as much as I would have liked. They still had over 1,000 sect members and close to 8,000 slaves. I had done a careful tally these past months and I figured my numbers were close to accurate. Even with these numbers, they were the smallest group in Chicago. From what scant information I was able to gather, the Sons of Autumn had nearly 25,000 acolytes. They were mostly religious extremists and conspiracy theorists, all hell-bent on killing anything in sight to help atone for mankind's crimes. A good thing most of their members were rather weak. The Triad had fewer members, but they were more mentally stable overall. My rough estimate pegged them at somewhere around 18,000 members. They were growing though as they swallowed smaller holdout groups up. The rest of Chicago either fell in the fighting, was smart enough to remain out of sight, or fled the area for some place safer. As for the Shadow faction, there were no real details. Charla headed towards the council chambers. You could tell the fighting had been fierce here. The front of the building had been demolished by attacks. Glass, stone, and wood were scattered about the street and the first floor. Bodies were pulped against walls or just pink stains. Most likely the work of Obadiah. We took the stairs to the third floor where the council room resided. I stepped inside to be greeted by a scene of pure horror. 10 headless bodies sat in the council chairs. Blood still dripped from the ceiling from the arterial spray. Each head was pinned to the wall behind the body by a spike of metal. Dominique the duelist was pinned to the floor by his wrists and ankles. All of his skin had been peeled off of his body, all except his head. The look of horror on his face at his time of death turned my stomach. Sure, I wanted the man dead, but this was excessive. I choked back the vomit that wanted to force its way up. Charla just let out a little giggle as she stomped around in the blood like a child would a puddle of water. Then she turned to me. Don't think I didn't notice, Paul. I gulped. I wasn't sure what she was talking about, but it made me nervous all the same. I remained still and quiet. Anything I said now would just make my punishment worse. Not going to even try to defend your actions? Good boy. Don't worry, I will replace those missing scars tonight. I wanted to collapse, or cry, or yell. Instead, I just sat there, emotionless. I shall endeavor to rectify my error in the future, mistress. See that you do. It would be a shame if I had to turn you into a eunuch for a few days again. She slapped me across the face as she skipped out of the room. I followed behind, like an obedient puppy. Chapter 46, Rest Period. With the council's demise, it was time to consolidate power for Charla's father. For that reason, anyone loyal to his faction was kept close at hand. Anyone with an ounce of brain matter kept their head down during this time. I was freed from my patrol duties, and even guard duty, as Charla met with her father most of the day. Her not seeing a need to keep me to guard her now that the council was dead. It was time to try and set the first part of my plan in motion, or at least attempt to. What better place to plan the downfall of the Black Dragon sect than the apartment of the sect leader's daughter? Nobody would be stupid enough to come in unannounced. And if Charla returned, she would expect me here anyway. I got to work testing combinations of runes. With the one I got from the Kin-Klara alone, the rune was middling at best. It seemed to cause the wearer to grow about 10%. While that might interest the people who invented Viagra, it didn't interest me. I needed the rune to affect the item it was carved into, not the person wearing it. Eventually, I found a combination that worked. I ended up using the runic letter for constraint. Now the books I read didn't all agree on the meaning of some runes. Others had multiple meanings. I didn't care what those extra meanings were as long as they worked for my needs. Now I needed to enhance the first rune's effect. I decided on the rune for strength. This is when I ran into an issue. The constraint rune reduced the power of the other runes. I had to think about the issue for a bit. Eventually, I decided to put the runes into a knot design to see how that affected them. I had to think about what I wanted. I don't think the Trinity design would work. All that did was connect the runes. I had 3 things to accomplish with my design. I needed it to expand, to constrain the power to the item, and I would need to hide my rune from view. I can't imagine Charla would be pleased with me if she knew I modified my collar. If she found out before I was ready, she would likely kill me. I found the perfect rune to prevent that. It would be difficult for me to carve since it was so ornate. Odin's illusionary rune stood for camouflage and deception according to my books. It fit my needs perfectly. Now I just needed to figure out how to put them all together. The knot design I decided to go with represented eternal life, or so the book said. 2 interlocking ovals looped through an outer circle. A simple design that should fit my 3 needs. I carved the outline of the design. Then I filled the first oval with the growth and strength rune. I filled the second oval with the constraint rune. Then I filled the last circle with 4 sets of the Odin rune. It was just as time-consuming as I thought it would be. As I finished the last rune, the whole design faded away on the plate. It had been a success. I tugged on the plate to try and expand it. What I found was that I could only expand it in one direction. Not exactly what I was going for. I stuck the failed piece into my ring and started over. This time I filled both ovals with the growth and strength runes. Then I put the constraint runes in the voids made by the ovals. Last I added the 4 Odin runes like before. I waited for the carving to fade from view and tested my work. It worked. The plate nearly doubled in size. I checked its stats just to see. Runic metal plate, expands up to 75% of its original size when pulled on. Rune is camouflaged and constrained to this piece. I gave a tired smile. My plan could proceed now. I looked out the window to see that it was starting to get dark. Charla would return soon. I cleaned up my tools and mess and went to await her at the door. It was another 3 days before I could get back to working on my plan. Not because I was busy but because I was in too much pain to do anything. Charla had made good on her promise to restore my scars. She cooed at me during the beating, letting me know that if I just behaved she wouldn't have to punish me like this. My bottled rage fought me the entire time. It's like it knew something was going to change and it demanded out. I fought that, more than I felt the pain from Charla's ministrations. I kept having to repeat the mantra in my head, in due time, rest. Over and over again, until the rage subsided. As soon as I was free, I got back to work. I had 2 of the older style collars still, from when I was with the caravan. I took one from my ring and set it on the table. I stared at it for what felt like hours. I couldn't afford to fuck this up. I inspected the ring with the jeweler's loop I purchased so long ago. The collar was less than an inch wide. It would take precise carving to get the entire design on the piece. I let out a breath and took out my smallest carving instrument. I clamped the collar between some large hardcover books. It would do in place of a vise. I got to work, first laying out the lines of the design carefully. I stopped every few minutes to inspect my work. 3 hours passed as I carved the last rune on the second oval ring. I had to take a break, my fingers and arms were cramping up from the strain of holding them in position so long. It was a good thing I did. Charla came home as I was in the main room stretching. All my gear was in my room, although I was usually forced to sleep on a small pad next to her bed like some pet. I nearly froze as she entered. I quickly remembered that she never entered the other room unless I was there. My body was tense as I waited to see if she stumbled upon my work. The partially finished work was lying out in the open, just begging to be discovered. She looked at me briefly before she headed to her room. Upon her return, she stopped. "You have been lazy these past few days. Go train in the arena, I can't have you going soft on me," she said with a leer towards my crotch. Screw cold water, her gaze caused more shrinkage. If my balls could shrink inside my stomach they would have. "Yes, mistress," I replied, heading straight out the door. I couldn't give her any reason to look into the room. I could only hope the item sat undiscovered until I returned to retrieve it. It was 3 agonizing days before I could check to see if the item was undisturbed. I was almost manic with worry. As soon as she left me to my own devices I hurried back to the apartment as quickly as I dared, without raising any alarm. The modified collar was where I had left it, untouched. I collapsed to the floor in relief. Once I managed to pull myself together I got back to the work. I managed to finish the rest within an hour. I felt like I was running out of time and needed to finish the first stage of my plan before someone found out or something went wrong. At least then I could just escape. The carving faded from the collar. I could feel that it was stable, my runes were not designed to interface with the enchantment this time around. So there were no worries of the collar exploding. Time to see if all my hard work paid off. I tugged at the collar. It expanded in my hands like one of those Hoerman spheres, only in 2 axes instead of 3. The girth did increase along with the diameter, but it was minuscule, so I deemed it unimportant. I pushed the ring back down to its original size. I needed to be faster if I wanted this plan to work. That's when an idea hit me. It took me twice as long to carve my new idea out, making sure to hide my work if I ever left. Over the next week, I finished my project. In my hand, I held a stamp with the reverse of my design. It had taken me much longer than my first successful carving because doing a reverse design was extremely difficult. I had to start over 3 times. I also had to figure out how to harden the piece of metal to make it last. Judicial use of my lava and regenerating rain made it so I was at least partially successful. I took out a plate and tapped the end of my design into it with my little work hammer. The stamp worked, transferring the design correctly. I waited nervously for the image to fade. After about 30 seconds it faded away. It was much slower than when I carved it manually, but it looked to work. I let out a sigh of relief, then checked the item. Runic metal plate, expands up to 50% of its original size when pulled on. Rune is camouflaged and constrained to this piece. Okay, so not as effective as carving it manually, but it should be sufficient for anyone to slip the collar off of their head. I stamped it on my last collar to make sure. It would be a tight fit for some people, but it should be enough. Now for the tough part. I lay my head sideways on the table. I had a hard surface supporting the collar, and I was looking into the room's mirror. I gingerly positioned the stamp on the flat of the collar. Then I brought my hammer up, resting it on the stamp. I double-checked everything was flat and in position and gave the end of the stamp a solid whack. The blow seemed to echo in the small room. I sat up and turned the collar to get a good look. All of the lines seemed to transfer over correctly. I waited in anticipation for the design to fade. Eventually, it disappeared like the others. I had done it. I even avoided the command not to damage the collar, because I knew it wouldn't harm it. Getting up, I cleared my workspace, then I walked to the front door making sure it was locked. I gingerly grabbed both sides of the collar and pulled. The collar expanded and I was able to slip it over my head with an inch to spare. I held it in one hand while I rubbed at my neck with the other. For almost 4 months I wore that damned collar. I looked at it, wanting to toss it to the side and escape right now. It would be so easy to just run away. Instead, I slipped the collar back on and shrank it back down to its original size. It was time to start getting my revenge. I had a general idea of what I planned to do. I wanted to create sleeper agents in the guise of slaves. This was easier said than done. First off, I didn't know who to trust. I would need to find people smart enough not to blow their cover, as well as those motivated to see the downfall of the sect. Some slaves had embraced their condition and were in support of the Black Dragons. Those were usually the ones not forced to fight daily or were not tortured like I was. While I could hate these weak individuals, I couldn't fault them for their choice. Who wouldn't choose to live in relative safety and security? This limited my options as I didn't know that many slaves. Eventually, my decision came down to Moana the chemist. While she was a non-combatant, she also fought regularly in the arena and was good friends with Sheila, who I also wished to pull to my side. I didn't completely trust Sheila though, so thought it better to have her friend at risk of discovery along with me. Perhaps that would keep her honest. Now I just needed to get Moana alone. Chapter 47, First Steps. It took me 3 weeks to learn Moana's habits and come up with a suitable place to disable her so I could nullify her collar. During that time I learned something interesting. I had a run-in with William Conrad, my old handler, while we were in the convoy. He was now level 11, but that wasn't the interesting part. It wasn't even our first run-in since we returned. He took every chance he could get to cause me a bit of suffering. Usually, it was by giving me a command I couldn't carry out immediately, causing the collar to apply its pain when I failed to comply. This time it was something simple. I was mid-step when he told me to not move. My momentum carried my foot forward and I waited, teeth clamped tight in expectation of the pain. He laughed and told me to continue as he walked away. I was so dumbstruck by the lack of pain that I stood there for a bit. I had to feel to make sure the collar was still there, a spike of worry creeping up my spine. No, it was still there. The only possibility it could be was my rune. The only rune that it could be was the constraint rune. Not only had it constrained the power of my rune to the item, but it also constrained the enchantment to the item. This made my plan so much easier. Now anyone I freed wouldn't be subject to truth questioning or orders. They would still need to pretend to follow orders though. I mulled this all over as I waited in the alley. It was late at night and I had taken the opportunity to slip out of my room while Charla slept. I did this occasionally, she was usually lenient on me as long as I returned before she awoke. If not, I earned a few extra scars. She never bothered to ask where I went on those occasions. The woman simply didn't care, she was only too happy to have an excuse to hurt me, not that she needed one. There she was, walking down the dark street alone. There was little to no crime in the sex holdings. Slaves were forbidden from harming members and fighting outside of the arena or patrols was frowned upon. The rest was simply not reported. I expected that sect members got away with quite a bit of rape and violence. I checked the street to see that it was clear both ways. I had stored my collar and was wearing a sect armband. It was a spare one I had taken from Charla's room. I had learned that the higher the owner of the armband the more powerful the compulsion. If my plan failed only Charla or her father would be able to uncover my plan. I pulled the hood low over my face and called out, "Moana, come here." The woman froze and turned in my direction. I could see the fear in her eyes. My guess was this wasn't the first time she had been dragged into an alley alone. She struggled against the command as her feet inexorably took her into the dark alley. I could see tears in her eyes. I took one more look around, to make sure it was clear. "Stop there." She stopped and I heard a quiet sob escape her lips. "Tell me the truth, Moana, if you were free from your enslavement, what would you do?" I would kill every last one of you," she said, sobbing in her hands. "Good answer." "Wait, what?" she said, trying to look at me. "Don't turn around." She stopped and waited. "What if I told you I could free you, would you help me free others?" "Yes," she said tentatively. "You don't believe me, do you?" "No, I don't." "Good, be skeptical." I walked around to face the woman. I threw back my hood and she let out a gasp at recognizing me. "What the hell, Paul, if they catch you with that armband they will execute you." "They would, you are correct," I said as I pulled my collar from my ring. "I am as likely to be executed for that as I am for this," I said, showing her my collar-free neck. She gaped in astonishment. "How, it's not possible." I expanded the collar and slid it over my head. I then shrunk it down again, showing her that it was indeed possible. Then I removed it again and put it back into my ring. "Well? Care to help me start an uprising?" "You're nuts," was her reply. It took a bit of convincing, but eventually she was on board with my plan. After I stamped her collar, she played with putting it on and taking it off multiple times. I even showed her that commands no longer worked and she needed to be careful not to forget to follow any that were given. I didn't think she would have any issues. She had been in a collar since day one, and had been imprisoned since before the system went live. "We need to quietly recruit more people. Every person we add is going to increase our risk," she replied. I slid one of my small storage rings to her. She looked inside and gave me a troubled glance. "We only need to use the armband if they give us trouble. It's either that, or kill the person, and that will lead to questions. At least this way we can order them not to speak of this." "Where did you get these?" I smiled. "A gift from our departed council, only Charla's father will be able to override the orders given by those." "Okay, what's the next step?" "How much do you trust your friend Sheila?" "More than I trust you," she mumbled. I chuckled. "Good enough, let's arrange a time to secure her cooperation." "Fine, but if this is some cruel joke I will move heaven and earth to destroy you." She said this with so much conviction that I couldn't help believing her. It meant her passion to survive wasn't squashed completely by her captivity. "I need to return to my mistress. Remember, don't deviate from your orders." "I'm not an idiot," she said hotly, before beginning to walk away. "Ahem, your collar." She looked down at her hand and the collar she was holding. "Just, shut up," she said, before putting the collar back on. I watched her leave before I made my way to my next stop. I wasn't about to put all my eggs in one basket. I had not lied to the council about my involvement with the Shadow faction. While I had never dealt with them personally, I did know a few people who traded with the Shadow faction. Either they could join my crusade or I could turn them in. As long as I covered my tracks with orders it would be safe enough. After my meeting, they were convinced to join. They even promised to get in contact with the Shadow faction to help out. They wanted me to hand over the secret to unlocking the collars, but I was loath to do it. Rune crafting had become so instrumental for me that I didn't want to hand it to just anyone. I just told them I would think about it. I also only unlocked one of them. I thought it would be best to keep them honest this way since I didn't know them personally. The other I ordered not to discuss anything that happened between us tonight. If they proved trustworthy I would unlock the other. I felt better after leaving that meeting. Now I had two cells working towards the same goal. If it was true that they could get the shadow faction involved it would make it a third cell. I stashed the armband and put my collar back on before I headed back to Charla. The light was starting to peek over the horizon so I had to hurry. I managed to get back to the apartment before Charla awoke. I schooled my emotions, my joy was threatening to break through my stony mask. I was now in for the long haul, moving too fast at this point would be dangerous. I took the time to examine my armor. It had held up decently over the last few months but was showing signs of falling apart. I repaired the loose plates and sewed shut the ripped fabric. It would have to do for now. I would go on a shopping trip shortly to collect some supplies I would need. Charla awoke about an hour later. She walked through the living room in her birthday suit, trying to get a rise out of me. She would be stunning if she wasn't so rotten on the inside. I stared at her with my vacant expression and she pouted. She came over to caress my face. Paul, why do you keep acting out? I care for you but you keep making me punish you. Sorry, mistress, I will try better. Would you willingly make love to me? I clenched my jaw before I answered this question. I could answer the question any way I liked, but I doubt a positive answer would fool her. Instead, I would have to suffer the consequences of the answer she suspected. No. Why? She stomped across the room and picked up her whip. I silently grit my teeth, it was going to be one of those days. This wasn't the first time we had this interaction. I readied myself for the pain to come. She beat me until both of us were covered in my blood. It dripped off her naked body to pool on the tile floor. She was holding her favorite prize in her hand, giving it a loving pat before she threw my manhood at me. You will return my love one of these days. Heal yourself up, we have work to do today, she said, stomping into the bathroom to shower. She had serious issues, I don't think all of them came from her choice of class either. Pre-system she would probably be confined to a mental institution. Her father's influence was probably the only reason she hadn't been. I reattached my member and healed my wounds. It was quicker than letting the system regrow it. I let out a soft sigh as the flesh reattached itself. I discarded my shredded clothing and pulled out a new set, along with a rag to wash the blood off of me. I knew she wouldn't let me clean off with a shower, just to teach me a lesson. The wounds always closed up but the memory of the pain just piled on top of all the old pain. I let a bit of the anger out just to feel something else for a bit. I just needed to remember that this was almost over, a few months more of abuse and I would be free. With any luck, the entire sect would go down in flames. I followed Charla out to the rally station. It's where they launched offensives and patrol groups from. She handed me off to the person on duty, for assignment. The Triad was making a push into the old Sons of Autumn territory and we were going to hit them on their flank. I was assigned to a group of people I had never worked with before. They were all lower level than me. The fighting was sporadic but our group suffered 3 casualties when we were set upon by 10 Triad members that lay in ambush. Only my healing kept the others alive until we managed to extricate ourselves from the area. I raged internally at the idiot who put a team of people together that didn't know the other's strengths and weaknesses. Had I worked with the old teams I could have employed more of my AoE attacks to deal with the enemy, instead, I had to hold back because teammates kept jumping into combat or getting in my way. Of course, the handler fled at the first opportunity, leaving us to fend for ourselves. I added him to my shit list. Attacks and counterattacks like this went on for a few weeks until a new territorial boundary was established. There was still the occasional skirmish along that front but it died back down to normal levels. Losses had been heavy on both sides of the fighting, now the groups were licking their wounds and recovering for the next offensive in the spring. During this time Moana was able to signal me that she was ready to bring Sheila in. I set up a time and place for our meeting. It was time to start expanding the resistance. Chapter 48, Preparations. At this point, I didn't trust anyone completely. So I made some preparations before our meeting. To prepare, I needed to make a trip to the bazaar, which currently sat at the far edge of the city. Nobody controlled that area but both sides would send in raiding groups to try and kill off people coming and going, to prevent them from gaining more gear. The only reason it stayed sort of neutral was its out-of-the-way location. This one remained open all the time so I could hoof it there and back during the night. Even better I had Bella. I stopped in at the patrol building, to check the map of active patrol groups. Nobody questioned why I was there, this was a normal occurrence. I mapped out the path I would take to avoid any unwanted attention. Then headed back to wait for night. When Charla was fast asleep, I snuck out and headed to the closest border. I knew I couldn't exit via the gates, so I had to do a little creative escaping. I looked over the ledge of the 10-story building. It was windy on the roof. The building across the street was only 8 stories tall. I stored my collar and anything that could identify me as a Black Dragon member or slave. I backed up to the far side of the roof and took a running start, enhanced halfway by blink step. Then I leapt from the roof, propelling myself across the 4-lane road. Halfway across I cast area of denial and tried to position myself to roll. Well, I rolled all right. I rolled across the building's roof and off the far side, plummeting to the ground with a bang. Luckily my spell absorbed all the damage. I got up and ran down the alley before anyone came to investigate the sound. I kept running until my spell wore off. Then I pulled Bella out of her cage. She was a bit snappy with me at first. Can't say I blame her, she was cooped up for 3 months. It's a good thing I was able to smuggle food and water to her regularly. I soothed her for a bit before I mounted up, then we headed off. We made sure to avoid any patrol zones and skirt the boundary of the Black Dragon territory. I was even wearing my old hoodie to help disguise me. It didn't take us too long to get to the bazaar building. This one was 3 or 4 times the size of the one up north. I didn't see anyone watching the building, but that didn't mean much. There were so many tall buildings it was impossible to check every window. I would just have to hope I got in and out before I could be stopped. Bella and I rode straight through one of the entrances. The flash of light as I was teleported away blinded me for a few seconds. Eventually, my eyes returned and I was in a brightly lit bazaar. This one was completely different than the one I visited before. Instead of haphazard stalls spread about, there were actual buildings and storefronts. Wide avenues between the stores on either side allowed the masses of traffic to flow by with ease. I appeared in a small clearing off to the side of the street. All manner of creatures were coming and going through the portal, teleported to whatever world they hailed from. I took a deep breath. The smells and aromas of the bazaar were unique, with so many different cultures and species mixing together. I rode Bella slowly through the street, trying to get my bearings or find a map or something. At least the shops had easily readable signs stating what they sold. Gurut's Tile House, Shamugi's Livery, Fethun's Apiary. On and on the names went until I came to one that might work, Granok's Smithy. I stepped inside to see an unknown creature behind the counter. It had 4 limbs with 3 fingers each and stood on 4 others. Its skin was a semi-translucent teal color, and it had 3 large eyes on a bulbous head. It let out a whistling warble that the system translated. "Greetings, traveler, what can Granok do for you?" "Ah, yes, I was wondering if you can provide me with say 200 small metal plates, with a hole big enough for a rivet to go through at one end." "You are crafting armor, yes? Why not use larger plates or have leather enchanted?" "I can't afford the enchanting cost, and larger plates would reduce my mobility." "What size plates do you require?" I showed him one I had worked to the size I needed. "Very good, what material would you like these made out of?" "Something light but strong, stronger than steel." "I have 4 options. I will list them from the cheapest to the most expensive. Titanium, Baracium, Alavantium, and Mithril. I'm not really familiar with those types of metal, other than titanium. Could you list off their properties?" "Very well, Baracium is slightly stronger than steel at about half the weight. It is a blue metal commonly used in boat construction. Alavantium has about the same strength as titanium but is only slightly lighter than steel. It is a chalky white in color and resists heat well. Good for fire defense even in its non-enchanted state. Mithril is quite soft until worked into a shape. Then it is processed with magic to make it one of the strongest and lightest metals known to the system. It is perfect for anything magical as it takes enchantments without losing any of the potency. It is also the most expensive." "And what about the prices for them?" "For 100 of the pieces you requested, Baracium would be 150 credits, Alavantium would be 400 and Mithril would be around 1000. Normal steel would run you 50. That is a steep increase in cost." "Indeed, if you wanted a simple ingot of Mithril it would be cheap, but the work is labor and time intensive to punch out those shapes." I had to think about this. I really didn't want to keep having to upgrade my armor. Plus I wanted to finally use the mana heart I had been saving for so long. In the end, I had him do up 200 plates, 100 each of the mithril and alavantium. He let me know it would take 2 hours. That was fine, I needed to go purchase some other items. I asked him if there was a map of the bazaar. He pointed me to an intersection and told me there would be a new one every 10 or so blocks. I had to pay him up front for the work since mithril was hard to rework after it had been shaped. I continued my ride until I came across the sign in the center of the street. It reminded me of the mall signs with the, "You are here." Only this one had the names of the stores down each street. I found one that looked promising and headed that way. Gimlick's Mystical Protections was a small shop, down a side alley from the main street. Despite its location, quite a few people were coming and going. I stepped inside to be greeted by a much larger inside. There were dozens of different creatures browsing the wares locked behind magical domes. I was starting to think this place might be out of my price range when a small gnomish man walked up to me. "Greetings, how can we help you today at Gimlick's Mystical Protections?" "Well, I was looking for something but I think your shop may be out of my price range." "Nonsense, we cater to all types of clientele." "What type of item are you looking for?" 2 items mostly. One that allows me to see through cloaking and illusions. The other to defend me against one attack." "Good, good, both are quite common items. If you are on a budget we can offer a one-time use item for the single attack. Afterward, it would turn to dust. You would just need to wear it around your neck before you expect the attack. For the illusion one, there are many options. Do you have an idea of the spell's level you wish to pierce?" I shrugged, "Under level 20 I assume, but likely over level 10. We could offer a few options. Do you want to nullify the illusion or cloaking?" "No, simply being able to see through it should be enough." "It sounds like a talisman of Shuma should be sufficient for your needs. It has 10 uses so would be much cheaper than a permanently enchanted item." "What's the price for both?" I asked hesitantly. 1,600 credits for the 2. I can assure you that price will be unmatched by our competitors. I'm sure they would all say that if I shopped around, but I really didn't have time. What I did have was a bag of gold coins. Maybe the man would be interested in a trade. "I'm curious, would you be interested in a trade, or partial trade?" "It would depend on the items being traded. What would you offer?" I pulled out one of the gold coins to let the man examine it. He pulled out a device and waved it over the coin. "Fascinating, you don't see these very often anymore. For each coin, I could take 10 credits off the trade." The bag held 100 coins, so knocking 1,000 off the price was a deal in my book. I handed him the rest of the coin and the credits and he brought back my items. They went straight into my ring. Next, I found a weapon shop and purchased another war staff to match the one I had. I wanted a backup, in case I ever accidentally destroyed mine again. Selling off the Justicar's tunic paid for that, as well as a case of 6 dwarven powder charges and timers. After that, I hit up an armorer. I purchased a wyvern hide tunic along with some wyvern hide cord to use in crafting my next armor. I tried to get some mithril rivets, but they had to be handcrafted while the armor was being made. I ended up going with titanium rivets instead. This way, if I needed to replace them, more people would likely carry the item. The wyvern was pricey at 1,500 credits, but I purchased it for its special attributes. It was very resistant to magic and certain elements like lightning and fire. I also purchased a trubar hide vest. This would be for my alternate set of armor. The trubar hide was thick and squishy, able to absorb blunt force extremely well. Plus it was cheap at only 300 credits. I managed to get him to throw in some crimson horsespider silk cloth for trade. All those useless weapons I had been carrying around were finally put to good use. There wasn't much special about the cloth other than dirt didn't stick to it. This would allow me to keep my armor cleaner. My last stop was to purchase as many healing and mana injectors as I could afford. I managed 5 of each. They were a bit pricier but also restored 150 instead of the normal 100. After that, I was flat broke. That was fine if I saved money and it cost me my life, I would feel really dumb. Checking my watch, it had already been an hour and a half. I decided to head back to Granix to finish waiting. I needed to be out of here as soon as possible. As soon as Granix finished my items, I rode for the nearest gate as quickly as the traffic would allow. I had one more stop in Chicago, the public library. I knew at least one was still standing as we patrolled past it numerous times. I expected the large building to contain many more books on runes and some on armor types. I needed to make sure my investment wasn't a waste. As soon as I popped out of the gate, I rode hard and fast. It was a good thing I did. I could hear shouts as 4 people waiting at the wrong gate spotted me. They tried to give chase and shot spells in my direction, but Bella was able to dodge the incoming attacks. I took a few twists and turns down streets just in case they had mounts of their own. After a few minutes and no sign of pursuit, I headed towards my objective. This was the second riskiest part of my journey tonight. The library was in an active search zone, so I needed to be cautious. Once I got close, I stored Bella back in her cage. She would attract too much attention. Peeking out from the corner, I saw the patrol. They were walking away about half a block up. I had gotten extremely lucky with my timing. I waited until they rounded the corner before I sprinted towards the library and up the steps. Unlike the library I visited before, this one had its windows all broken out. I just hoped that the books I was looking for were not on the looters' agenda. The library was massive and I had to backtrack a few times until I found the historical section. There were books scattered all over the building, but it didn't appear that any had been taken. I would have to search the floor to find the ones I was looking for. The card catalog got me to the right area. I picked up and discarded books at a fever pace. I eventually found a book on medieval armor and blacksmithing. In my ring, they went. Another one on classical armor styles. If the cover said armor, it went into my ring. I would sort through them later. Next, I went to the section where I could find books on runes, paganism, and ancient magic. I tossed any book that I thought might be beneficial into my ring. There were quite a few books that piqued my interest. I swear I cleaned out the entire aisle before I left the library. Time for the most dangerous portion of my plan. Turns out getting back in was way easier than exiting the compound. I recognized the two idiots on guard duty at this little used gate as the two I spoke with about the Shadow faction. I put my collar back on and simply strode up to the gate, waving at them. They were inclined to let me in. We heard about your jaunt by our Shadow faction contact. They were keeping an eye on you tonight. I was caught off guard by that statement. Oh, yeah. What did they say about my plans? They said it was feasible. That they would track your progress and determine the best time for them to assist. I guess that was about as good as I could expect. I left the two to their post and returned to my mistress. Chapter 49, Tormented. Paul, save me. Fiona screamed as the dead hands pawed at her body. I tried to reach out to her, but the hands tried to grab me as well. Their sickly skin was cold as ice as they tried to get purchase on my arms. I pulled my hands back from their icy grasp with a shudder. I can't, I moaned, backing away from the dead. I recognized every face as someone I had slain in battle. Leave me alone. I yelled at the horde of wraiths. Never, they replied in unison. Only Fiona's pleas for rescue broke the endlessly repeated word. I curled up in a ball on top of my pedestal, the creatures unable to get to me from here, and I just sobbed. I jerked awake, covered in a cold sweat. The nightmares were getting worse. I was lucky if I managed 3 hours of sleep a night between Charla's treatment and the nightmares. The lack of sleep was starting to make me jumpy, and that wasn't good. I needed to try and find something to help me deal with this problem before I went full Durden. It was a good thing I knew a chemist. I didn't know what skills she had, but perhaps she could make me something that would help me sleep. I would bring it up when we met later in the week. She had finally picked a time to get Sheila alone so we could modify her collar. If everything went to plan, we would have a new member for the revolt. Baby steps, I had to remind myself. I sat up on my bedroll and moved into a lotus position to meditate. It was one of the things old man Trumbo taught me, but it hadn't seemed very relevant at the time. I certainly wasn't ever in a position to meditate for an extended period. Since I couldn't sleep, now seemed like a good time to reacquaint myself. I was started awake by Charla calling for me. Shit, somehow I had managed to fall asleep. Oh God, now she was going to punish me later. I got up and hurried to her. Dallying wouldn't make my punishment any less severe. Yes, mistress. Paul, what have I told you about making me look for you? I'm sorry, mistress, would you like to carry out the punishment now? I'll do it when I return tonight. Actually, I want you to stand on one foot until I return, that should warm you up. Yes, mistress, I said, immediately lifting one leg and standing there. She let out a huff of breath as she exited the apartment. As soon as I heard the door shut and lock, I lowered my leg. I made sure to note my exact position in the room. It wouldn't do to be busted by negligence or forgetting which foot I had up. While it wasn't the most comfortable position, I decided to start my rune crafting sitting in front of the entry door. This way I would hear well in advance, Charla, or anyone for that matter coming. I pulled one of the alavantium plates from my ring. I also pulled out one of the armor crafting books. I flipped through the pages until I found illustrations of what I wanted. It helped me figure out a few of the mistakes I made in my previous armor. I didn't count the armor I made for Charla. Even though hers turned out to be of high quality. Hers was just a leather doublet with some inlaid plates at important spots, the arm studded with small triangular rivets. I added no runic enchantment to the item. She still took great joy in using those spiked rivets to slap me around if I failed to follow her instructions to the letter. She would always remark on how well the item held up, while I bled on the ground from her abuse. I pulled myself out of those thoughts. She would get hers eventually. I went back to laying out my intended design on the trubar hide. When I was finished, I expected the armor to look like a simple padded gambeson. It wouldn't be as easy to move in as my current armor or the one I would make from the wyvern hide, but it would do well to protect me from the cold winter to come. Leaves were already starting to fall, even this far south, so winter was not too far away. So far the weather seemed to not have changed much, despite the rending, so we could expect a bitterly cold winter here in Chicago. I stepped back, examining the plates I had laid out all over the piece of leather. None were attached yet, but it gave me a good idea of how the piece would look once complete. This trubar hide jerkin had short arms on it, that would extend to my elbows, unlike my other armor that was sleeveless. It also extended well past my waist, almost to my knees. I had purchased enough extra plates to add a semicircle of metal to the outside of each half sleeve. Below the waist, I would leave unplated. It was time for the hard part, carving. Because of the purpose of this armor, I decided I wanted to include some sort of runes for defense against cold. Most Celtic knot patterns were continuous. In some situations, a design like that would be fine. I decided to try something different with this one. I created 3 circles, looping a continuous line over and under to link them together like chain mail. The closest rune I could find was the one that stood for comfort. It would have to do until I learned more runes. I added to that a rune that stood for spring, figuring it couldn't hurt in the central circle. I added the 3 runes I used on my old armor: protection, strength, and power. The last circle consisted of the rune for magic and protection. Last I added Odin's illusionary rune to the binding rope holding all 3. This would keep anyone from discerning my methods unless they stole the item from me, or I sold it. The design faded away on the scrap plate I used as a test. I inspected the piece. I ended up having to rework the first runic circle a few times until I got a combination of runes that worked. I ended up going with fire and comfort. I had skipped using the fire rune, thinking it had more to do with actual flame. I didn't want to be bathed in flames. Turns out the rune was a lot more flexible than I first realized. I was happy with the results and got to work recreating my design on the actual metal I was going to use. I could speed the process along by making a stamp, but I wanted the best results I could possibly get. This was going to be my trump card armor for the time being. At least until I got time to work the mithril plates. After 5 plates I had to try something to speed this along. I carved out a stamp for just the knot design. I stamped the design on one scrap plate and added the runes by hand. Then I compared it to my earlier test. They had the same values. I sighed with relief. This would save me dozens of hours of work. I stamped all 100 plates. I had to resharpen the stamp after every 20 but even still, it was so much faster. I was glad the design only acted as containers for the runes and didn't affect the overall strength. I had to keep my finished pieces separate or I forgot which ones had been completed. The finished ones looked just as ordinary as the unfinished ones when the design was hidden. The only way to tell was to hold them or use Identify. They gave off a slight magical vibration when held, almost impossible to detect unless you knew what to look for. I wasn't surprised. Each piece in and of itself was weak. Only when they were all combined did they produce the desired strength. I finished my 28th piece when I heard footsteps. I quickly swiped everything into my ring and hurried back to my place on the floor. My improved memory told me exactly where and how to stand. I even had the added benefit of looking tired. I finished getting into position as the lock on the door clicked. Charla walked in, not bothering to spare me a glance as she headed towards the kitchen. Since she returned, I was able to put my foot back down. I moved towards the door and shut it, deciding it was best to remain there unless she called. She returned from the kitchen after finishing her meal. "Paul, head down to the patrol captain and inform him you are available for duty." "Yes, mistress," I replied, bowing before I turned to exit the apartment. I had heard the rumors. The Triad was pushing back against our forces, now that the Sons of Autumn had left the Chicago metro area. This was causing our forces to be spread thin, and while I didn't want the Black Dragon to win this war, I needed them to remain intact for just a bit longer. Otherwise, they would just pull back and regroup as the Suns had. I wanted them all to fall, even if I didn't think the Triad was much better. As I stepped outside, the brisk air of mid-fall hit me. They called it the Windy City for a reason. I donned my armor, putting my ratty old sweatshirt over it to keep the cold at bay. A puff of vapor clung to the air as I let out a sigh. I liked the early fall and the colors, but I hated winter. I cast elemental defense and it seemed to help. I made my way down to the patrol building to sign in. I didn't have to follow Charla's orders anymore, but I couldn't risk her finding out I skipped out on patrol duty. That would be a dead giveaway that something was amiss. Best just to get it over with. I was assigned to a group I had worked with, in the past. We knew each other's fighting styles to some extent. The patrol turned out to be boring. We just rushed from one hot spot to another, never seeming to get there before the Triad pulled their forces back. We tried to force a battle, but their forces dug into prepared positions and threw spells at us. The overall commander of this force pulled us back after 3 hours. There I sat, looking out through a broken window. It was one of our forward outposts. The enemy knew where we were, but they were staying behind their fortifications. This is why I hated fighting the Triad. Sure, they were smart, but they were also cowards. They only ever engaged if they could bring overwhelming force to the fight. It forced the Black Dragon into an untenable position unless they changed tactics. If it was up to me, I would sneak in a force of assassins and decapitate their command structure. Thankfully it wasn't, and I wasn't about to offer up any helpful solutions. If the fighting went on like this, it should last long enough for me to carry out my plan. I expected winter to put a hold on most of the fighting. Chapter 50, Fomenting Rebellion. I waited in the dark alley, my new armor securely fastened to my body. It looked almost the same as my old armor from a distance. I would only be wearing it for this and other clandestine transactions, at least until my plan was complete. It would stand out too much otherwise. It did a great job of keeping me warm though. I looked at the stats again. Rune-crafted Drabar Brigandine. Quality, superb. Armor, 25. Slashing resistance, 40%. Stabbing resistance, 40%. Blunt resistance, 25%. Cold resistance, 65%. Heat resistance, 35%. Magic resistance, 55%. This metal-reinforced leather brigandine was crafted by an intermediate crafter with excellent materials. Each plate was painstakingly rune-crafted to improve the protection and resistance of the armor. Overall, I was more than happy with the results. The black fabric was sewn to make the whole piece look like padded armor. It took a bit to get used to the extra bulk and weight. I did notice a bit of limitation on my movement, but nothing extreme. I heard footsteps, so I stepped back into the shadows to try and conceal myself better. It was early morning, so the shadows were long and easy to hide in. It was risky doing it during this time of day, but Sheila had not given us much of a choice. God, Moana, why do we need to cut through this stinking alley? Can't we just go the long way? No, now quit your complaining, or I will turn around and you won't get to see the surprise. Fine, but this better be good, Sheila said, walking right past my hiding spot. Halt and remain quiet, I spoke quietly from behind the women. Sheila froze as Moana and I checked the ends of the alley to see if anyone noticed. The coast was clear for now. I hurried back to the inert but angry form of Sheila. Look, we don't have time for your petulance. As quietly as you can, answer me this. Do you wish to be free of your collar and take revenge on the Black Dragons? She glanced from me to her friend, then to my armband. She knew something was up since her friend wasn't compelled to stop as she had been. Are you stupid? Of course, I would, she said indignantly. Good, now for the next question. Can you hide your feelings while we prepare? She began to say before I cut her off. Be truthful, this is important. I'm not sure, she replied, hanging her head. It's pretty much what I expected. Moana was about to object when I held my hand out to stop her. You do realize if you fail you are putting Moana's life in jeopardy as well. Moana got angry and was about to hit me when Sheila spoke up. For her safety, I can do it. Good. It didn't feel good using them this way, having deduced their feelings for each other, but it was the only way to keep the battle-crazy woman in check. She could hate me later. I let them have their moment of affection in the form of a quick hug before I struck the design into the collar, rendering it inert. Moana showed Sheila how to spread the collar, removing it from her head. How? Don't concern yourself with the how, the why is more important. We need to gather more slaves, and when the time is right, rebel. The Black Dragon put the final nail in their coffin when they captured me. Okay, so why us? Moana seemed like a logical choice. You, on the other hand, that was her choice. I didn't think you could be trusted to hold it together. She took a menacing step towards me, but I didn't back down. You said so yourself. This seemed to stabilize the woman. Fine, but you better have a plan. You can't expect to lure every victim into an alley. She was right, and I had thought about my plans over the last few weeks. I decided to change them up a bit. Even adding one person had taken way too long. At this rate, it would be years before I could enact my plan. That was why I created 2 more stamps. These were slightly different than the one I made initially. I added a confusion rune to the sides, so anyone attempting to look at or identify the item would get a different result each time. I tested my results as thoroughly as I could. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to hide the confusion rune, as that seemed to disable its ability to work. You both have storage rings. They nodded. I handed each a stamp and a small hammer. What if they find these items on us? I shrugged. Use identify on them. I knew Sheila had the skill, or a form of it at least. Turns out Moana had the skill as well. I guess it made sense, she needed to be able to identify chemicals or plants she might need. Paperweight. Is this some sort of sick joke? Sheila said, shaking the stamp in my face. Butt plug. Wei-wa, no. Try using identify again. She did as I asked while glaring at me. Her eyebrow rose and she looked up with a confused expression. Now it says it's a doorstop? How did you enchant these? Better question is, why would you enchant them? It's not an enchantment. It's the same process I used to disable the collars. The why should be obvious. To keep anyone from learning the secret to how I bypassed the enchantment. I plan on making a few more to speed up this process. Only give them to people you trust. Even then I expect our secret getting out sooner or later. Hopefully, by that time enough of us will be free to completely disrupt their plans. So how are we supposed to know when this is? It should be easy to figure out. I imagine someone will get caught or act on impulse against a Black Dragon member, I said, with a dismissive shrug. I have to go. I figure we only have a few more weeks to prepare, a month at most, before someone slips up. So who is leading this rebellion? You? I would have laughed, but she was seriously asking. I just pointed to Moana, who looked back at me in slack-jawed astonishment. When were you going to tell me? I just did. Besides, I can't coordinate from the position of Charla's punching dummy. It has to be someone who knows the slaves. I hardly know anyone. Well, maybe if you weren't such a pretentious uptight prick you might gain some friends around here. I shrugged in response. I did act that way for a reason, so it wasn't like she was wrong. Whatever, let's go, Moana. They turned to leave, but I stopped Moana quickly. Do you have anything to help me sleep through the night, without dreaming? Nightmares. I nodded. It's not uncommon, she said, looking at her partner that was watching the end of the alley and waiting for her. She handed me a small box. Take one before bed, it should give you about 6 hours of uninterrupted sleep. I thanked her as I went the other way down the alley. I opened the box to see 10 pills. I would need to make them last. I was about as happy as I could be at the end of that meeting. I stashed my new armor and pulled out my old. The chilly wind bit at me until I got my old armor on and the sweatshirt over it. It was time to visit another old acquaintance. It had taken me considerable time to track this slave down. The man had melted through his collar by turning himself into magma using some skill. The old collar couldn't handle the strain and shattered. The man had managed to kill 12 Black Dragon members before being captured again. This time they slapped him in the new style collar. Still, they didn't trust him, so he was kept in a special room. That room was kept under guard at all times. Charla was keen on breaking this man's will as well. She had to be a tad gentler with him though, as he couldn't heal as I could. I walked past the building in my old slave attire. The armband secured away in my ring. I didn't stop or dally near the building. I only wanted to get a quick count of the guards. I counted 6 in total on the outside. This wasn't my first time past this building. Each day there were 4 to 6 guards. I would never be able to break the man free from the front. It's a good thing that wasn't my plan. I had found that the room they kept him in was below ground. From there it was just time-consuming. I found an adjacent building that was unoccupied. Over the last 2 weeks, I had used Earth Fist to displace enough dirt to form a tunnel large enough to crouch in, all the way to the back wall of his cell. I knew this for a fact because I could hear Charla beating and questioning the man on the far side, on more than one occasion. My work even earned me a skill. Metamagic, you have learned the ability to twist spells to suit your needs. I tried the skill on other spells, but it seemed like I had to practice with each spell to twist them. Some spells like my buffs felt rigid, and any time I even attempted to change them it broke the spell. Magic backlash was not something I was keen to experience again. That one event left me a drooling mess for over an hour. Today I didn't need to worry about Charla. She was with her father on the opposite end of the compound. I guess they were out inspecting the front line, to try and figure out a solution to their issues with the triad. I slowly shaved away more of the wall. Metamagic gave me a ton more control over the spell's effect. It just took a lot of concentration, not really something you could afford to devote during a battle. I shaved more away and I heard the man stir. He walked over the wall where he heard the noise. "Who's there?" he whispered. "An old acquaintance," I replied quietly. "Are we free to talk?" Jamal replied, "As long as we keep it quiet, nobody should be coming to check on me for a few hours." "Good. First things first, I'm sorry for putting that first collar on you. I had my orders, and couldn't disobey. I'm sure you understand how that goes now." I heard the man give out a sigh. "Yes, doesn't mean I don't want to smash your face in though." "Noted. Would it make us even if I freed you from your collar?" This was the riskiest part of my plan. The man needed to be strong enough to survive some beatings for a few more weeks. "You can do that." I could hear the eagerness in the man's voice, not a good sign. "I can't do it today, can you hold out for a few more weeks?" I heard the man give out a pleading whimper, followed by him trying to claw at the walls in desperation. Shit, I was forced to go with plan B. I pulled out the armband again. "Stop. Go back to what you were doing before I arrived. Mention this to nobody. I'm sorry, stay strong, you will be free." I put the armband away and backed out of the tunnel. I felt bad for the man, but he was on the verge of breaking. I couldn't take the risk that he would prematurely try to escape and ruin my plans. I would think of another way to break him free. Saving him was my first option, but after this meeting, I couldn't do that. I could still use him though, he would be my distraction while I dealt with the final step of my plan.